people on the internet. We're very happy to have the opportunity to share a little bit of our work with you all. I think we're going to start with a really quick, very quick introduction of the four of us that you see on screen, just who we are, and then we'll kind of get started and do a little speaker program that we've presented for you all. So I'll start since I'm already talking. My name is Katie Borum-Chatou, she, her pronouns, and I am the executive director of an organization called the Center for Media and Social Impact, based at American University in Washington, DC. And simply put, although we have a very long boilerplate, we study and showcase and create and celebrate the power of media for social change and social justice. And over the last several years, that has also included a lot of work in comedy, which you're going to hear about today. So just very quick introduction. I'm going to pass it off to whichever one of my colleagues wants to go next.
Canis, go.
Hi, so I am on a train. Sorry that you guys are seeing a masked mouth, but also someone whispering into a microphone. I am Canis Mobley. I'm a stand-up comedian and writer. I work with the Center for Media and Social Impact. I have performed around the world doing stand-up comedy. And this year I was on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and I host a Vice News show called Complexify. In addition to that, I work on the various projects that CMSI does, which again, you'll hear about later. Thanks so much.
Adrian, do you want to go?
Sure. Ako Adrian Chalapa Akam Toruma Akoikam Albuquerque Gya Akil. I live in Albuquerque. My name is Adrian. My Kiowa name is First Woman Under the Lodge. I am Kiowa and Apache from Oklahoma. I am a stand-up comedian. I'm a writer. I'm a mother of 4. I have 2 cats. I'm a Scorpio. I'm glad to be here. I've done lots of stuff. I started a group called Ladies of Native Comedy, and that was pretty cool. And so I'm a touring comedian and stuff like that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bethany Hall. I'm the creative director of comedy initiatives at the Center for Media and Social Impact. But I'm also a comedian. I starred on the Chris Gethard show for, I don't know, most of my life. And then I also, I wrote my own series called Thanksgiving. It was before I realized how problematic the title was. And you could also have seen me on 30 Rock and a few other shows. Okay, thanks.
I do appreciate that Adrian brought astrology into the room. I feel like maybe this will come up. I'm a Leo, fairly obviously. Leos, you love us or hate us. There's no middle ground. We do not inspire middle feelings. And I'm sure when I pass it back to Bethany, she will also talk about her sign. Okay, so what are we doing? So we love the title of this session, and we really appreciate the Upswell deciders choosing our session. We're really passionate about this work, as hopefully you can feel and see already. We are joining you from 4 different cities. Some of us are on moving trains. So we really love this work. I am not a comedian, but I am a bit of a clown of a human. So it makes me feel like I can play with comedians and they accept me for who I am. So thank you to the comedy ladies. So yeah, let me set us up here with what we do in this shared work that we do together, and why we feel, in all seriousness, is actually really important for social justice folks, and including racial justice, to really take comedy seriously. So I'll tell you a very, very quick story, and then I'm going to pass it over to Bethany to talk about what we've created because of this story, at least partially. So I will not go back to the beginning. I was a kid who wore underwear on my head a lot because I thought it was very funny. That actually is the beginning. But then many years after that, I was a producer for the great and legendary Norman Lear, who we know in sort of comedy. By the way, he's still alive. And I feel like sometimes the way that I talk about him, it feels like he's not, but he is almost 100. He is alive and thriving and continuing to make TV. So I was a producer and philanthropy director for Norman. And if you don't know that name, he sort of is credited with sort of creating the modern sitcom, but more importantly, being the first sort of successful TV person to incorporate social justice issues and social topics into comedy. And, in the 70s and 80s, well before his time, he had the first trans character on television in the 70s, if you can imagine that. His shows, All in the Family, Jefferson, Sanford and Son, One Day at a Time, captured issues like abortion and menopause and race relations and homophobia. I mean, just everything in the 70s. And there are many showrunners after that who sort of picked up from that mold and call him an inspiration. So anyway, a great gift to work for a person who's thinks way out of the box and is also very fun, which was good for someone like me. So years later, as I was starting to run this organization, this incubation lab, it's really like a giant playground. It's a research center, but also we make things out of nothing. So when I was digging into that work, I was doing a lot of work as somebody who's worked in social justice and media my entire career. I felt like the deeper I got into the sort of second half of my career, I wanted to bring comedy back into it because I felt like the sort of social justice sector, and that's probably many of you in the internet watching this, so NGOs, civil society, philanthropies, I felt like we weren't, as a collective, taking comedy seriously as being part of that struggle. And the struggle is, as we know, getting people to engage in social issues and to think differently and to see one another in the basic humanity, right? There's so much. And we all know intuitively about the role of creative culture in that. And yet comedy was still like, we're kind of afraid of it. We don't know how to use it. What if comedians are offensive? By the way, they usually are, which is part of how it works. And so we started a big research initiative to start to really do the science, social science and humanities research, because we're also nerds, to really study the influence and the persuasive influence in comedy and social change. And importantly, we wanted to use that research not just to know what we already suspected, which is that comedy is uniquely persuasive. It breaks down social barriers and taboos. It is more memorable than any other genre of media. This is true across disciplines, advertising, public health, political science, et cetera. We can cut through the clutter of noise. We are more likely to, there's a sleeper effect with comedy. So all these incredible things when we think about public engagement. But we didn't want to just do that research and have it sit somewhere like in a journal, for God's sake. I mean, we put it there too, but we don't want it to just like live and die in a peer-reviewed journal. Sorry, scholars on the call. Sometimes you like that, but I don't. But we wanted to take what we knew and build creative models and mechanisms to actually bring the social justice sector together with comedians to actually learn how to co-create together and to see what happens when that takes place. And also, we wanted to find ways to really lift up traditionally marginalized voices who have been historically really shut out of the entertainment media system. And we know who those communities are, right? Women, people of color, LGBTQ, lower socioeconomic, disabled community. And we really wanted to lift up that comedy because we know how important it is when we see authentic portrayals of funny people telling their own stories. It feels new in the marketplace because we have so dramatically shut these voices out for so many years. But it's not new. And all of this contributes to creating a more just culture that we want to live in, right? When we get to see many, many stories and lived experiences and people get to be funny with their authentic selves, we can all be a part of that, right? So it's both solidarity for communities who have been traditionally marginalized, representation, but also for those of us who are not, I'm a white lady. For those of us, by virtue of our race, have not been marginalized, it's important for us to see that representation too. So just a few more sciencey things, and then I'm going to pass it over to Bethany to talk about, like, what did we make now that we know these sciencey things? First of all, I wrote a book. It's behind me. I realized this was terrible planning on my part because I could like stretch back and get it, but I might fall off my chair. It's called A Comedian and an Activist Walk into a Bar, the Serious Role of Comedy in Social Justice. And maybe I'll put it in the chat. And it's where all the science lives about comedy and social change. And it kind of sets us up to be able to talk about these creative models that we have put in place at the Center for Media and Social Impact. The three things I want you all, I think especially for the nerds in the room who are like, but what does comedy do? Well, read chapter 2 of the book because it will tell you all those things in very, very fancy language that you will find maybe exhausting, but you will probably get through it. But three things that I think are the most uplifting ways to think about comedy and social change. So we think about comedy historically, and now we're talking specifically about social justice and racial justice. Comedy is always a source of social critique. It points out what is wrong and what needs to be corrected. This is the original function of comedy, according to Aristotle. Really old, he is dead. The second piece is, I like it when I make Bethany laugh. It really makes me very happy. Several of you are laughing. The second way that we think about the function of comedy culturally is comedy is also the source of civic imagination, right? And this is the one that makes us really excited. Civic imagination is the act of showing the just world that we want to create together. We can't just be pissed off all the time. We have to show what it looks like when we play and hope and our genuine selves together. So civic imagination is creating through comedy the work that we want to see, the world that we want to see. And the final one that's actually one of my new favorites that I've been writing and talking about a lot is, it comes from an older theory, but it's a really powerful idea called cultural citizenship. The idea that when we have so marginalized different communities and voices out of the cultural landscape that we don't even see them, there is a need to claim one's cultural citizenship. It's not enough to say like historically know us, but to say we actually want to claim that space and show you who we are. And comedy, it turns out, is a really important way to do that because of some of those sort of sciencey properties that I talked about earlier. So real crash course on comedy and social justice in 12 minutes. I do teach an entire class on this, so that's very hard to do. And my colleagues know that I'm quite a big talker. So the fact that I just did that in 12 minutes is maybe the greatest thing I've done this week. Thank you, Adrienne. So now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Bethany Hall, to talk about how this science has become really robust in the world that's making things with comedians, and we just love it.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. Also, thanks for the pointer that Aristotle is dead. I've been wondering and been meaning to Google it for so long, and now I know.
You know, good for that. That's why you need scholars.
We need scholars.
Tell you who's dead.
Now I know who's dead. Norman Lear, alive. We just had a meeting with him recently. Aristotle, dead. Okay, so yeah, when I, as a comedian, when I realized that I had people's attention, I was like, oh shit, I should figure out what I want to say. Because I think it's really, really precious to have people's attention and ears and to use your skills. I feel like I want to use my skills for something bigger than me. So it was really, really, I won't give you the cute meet cute about how Katie and I met. But I will say when we met, it was like fireworks everywhere, right? Because she had the research and I knew a lot about the community. I'm a working comedian. I felt like I knew the intentions of the comedians that I associate with. And I was like, we have to find a way to get these folks together. So we were able to secure a grant that allowed us to work together for a while. And in that time, we came up with something we call the comedy think tanks. And what we do with these comedy think tanks is we take brilliant comedians, professional comedians, and just as a side note, the reason we work with professional comedians is that comedy is a real skill. And it's a craft that needs to be honed in, and bad comedy is not effective at doing what we're talking about right now. So we need high level, amazing comedians like the ones you're about to talk to participate in this event with us in the think tank. So we take professional comedians. We also pay them real rates. Side note, it matters. I got a lot of side notes today, apparently. My sides are full of notes. So we get these professional, amazing comedians, and then we meet with leading social justice organizations, such as Color of Change, Define American, Caring Across Generations, and more. And we listen to these social justice organizations, and basically in the think tank, we spend a day or two with the comedians and the social justice leaders, learning about what they're trying to get out into the world. And I should note that the comedians that are in this space have a very specific relationship to the work we're about to tackle. So every time we start a think tank, we start from scratch and we hire comedians who we find who are appropriate to be communicating the work we're about to tackle. So if it's caring across generations, we want to talk about elder care, we will recruit comedians who are maybe taking care of an older loved one or part of the sandwich generation, like I am, where you have older parents, but also young kids. So people have a real personal connection to the work we're about to dive into. We spend a day learning in the think tanks. And then after that day, or sometimes 2 days, depending on the length of the think tank and the content we're evaluating, we just kind of close the door, and then it becomes a comedian only space where we process what was generally really heavy information. And once we are processing that, we start to make jokes, but we also are just honest reflecting on different things. From there, we start to build comedy. And so we don't have an agenda. We don't have a slogan we're trying to incorporate. We're just saying, what's the funniest thing about what's happening right here? And some of the ideas are terrible, and that's part of the process. And that's why the social justice folks are kind of on the other side of the door. We're allowed to say our terrible ideas, and we're allowed to pull our full authentic selves into the space. By the end of the think tank, we have developed several ideas that we comedians think are funny beyond anything else, and somehow have absorbed all of this social justice work, or all of the intentions of the organization we're working with, and it just comes through. So it's not peppered onto the content. The content is inspired through this deep learning that we do at the beginning of the think tank. Out of these think tanks, several projects have been created and developed. And so with that, I would love to pass on to my dear friend, Canis Mobley.
Hi, I hope you guys can still hear me. So I feel very lucky because in addition to working with CMSI, I came in working on one of the projects that was developed in a think tank earlier. So one of the projects that I am most passionate about is a web series called By Us for Us, which was created in conjunction with Color of Change. The Color of Change comedy think tank that happened in 2019, I think was one of the ones that was the most fruitful for us, I would say, where it created the Bufu account, the Bufu web series, but it also created a series that we're in the process of working on called Girls Who Color Outside the Lines. Yes, it's Bethany's favorite project, and for good reason, because it looks at how do we entertain and prepare young women for adulthood, but in a way that's specific to them, specifically girls of color who are underserved. When we talk to different people in the industry, when we talk to managers, when we talk to production companies, they're so interested in this project specifically because it's a market that isn't currently being served. So we're doing that, and not just from a perspective of, hey, like a Disney TV show, we're going to be loud and show bright colors and have a visual representation. But no, we talked to young girls of color between the ages of 8 and 15 to understand what would really be appealing to them and what speaks to their actual experiences day to day. So that, I think, is a successful project that we've done. In addition to that, we've worked with E Pluribus Unum on a project specifically aimed at racism in the South, taking, what was it, 6 Southern comedians and being the most vulnerable and honest I think I've ever been in a room of both Black, white, and minority people. So not only is it a success because we made some really funny content and it got shared and liked a bunch, but it was an opportunity to bring our full authentic selves. Katie mentioned that authenticity. It's not just, I think there's a lot of talk about we need representation, representation matters, but it doesn't really matter if you're just putting a filter on someone and being like, oh yeah, you know, there's darker tones here. It really matters when you're coming from a perspective of knowledge and intimate experience with that culture, and the content that we create really does that. I'm looking at my notes right now, I'm so sorry. So we are working with an organization called Irony Point on the Girls Who Color Outside the Line special. And they have done so many great things. You've heard of Irony Point, but you haven't heard of them. So Irony Point was the people, they're the group behind Sarah Cooper's Netflix special. They're the people behind I Think You Should Leave. I don't know, as a comedian, we reference I Think You Should Leave all the time. I don't know if normal people do. Katie, you know normal people? Do they reference things like that?
Amy
Thumbs up.
Schumer,
Okay.
all of Amy
Yes,
Schumer stuff. Yeah.
all of Amy Schumer's specials, Michelle Wolf's special. There's a ton of specials that they've done, and we're working with them. So we're able to get this project across the finish line. It's not just that we have great ideas, it's that we're able to execute on them in a way that actually makes an impact. Center for Social and Media Impact. We're just going to say impact a lot here because these projects do create that. In addition to, I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. I think our work matters, but our work is also really, really fun and it's funny. And the people who we are able to pull into these projects are amazingly talented, like our next speaker, Adrienne Chelipa, who just worked on IllumiNative's You're Welcome America, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Canis. Yeah, so like my fellow funny people have pointed out, comedy is super impactful, and I can tell you how it has impacted my life and the projects that we're working on. I'm going to go back a little bit. I met Katie and Bethany in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I knew I was going to be writing, and I knew that it was a comedy project, and there was a social justice element. And for me, those things have never really been separate because I have always been in trouble for my mouth. I grew up in the Bible Belt in Oklahoma, and it's not the type of place where one feels free to express themselves. And I, at a young age, sort of figured out that I could, I felt better when I made people laugh. And I think that I dove into it dealing with a lot of trauma. And it's not like if somebody was like, I'm really traumatized, I'm gonna go make jokes. It's just, I think, a natural occurring thing. And for my community where I'm from, and I can make a blanket statement about most Native American communities have some element of humor in their culture that is embedded there. Through our oral history, a lot of our stories are very funny. For us Kiowas, we have a character named Sunday, which the stories are just really hilarious. And so humor is not, and it's not this foreign concept. Now, stand-up comedy, that is different. For most rural areas, period. And I basically kind of had to carve out a place for myself in that realm. And as a result, I realized that I was really touching on some topics that made people uncomfortable. And most people would probably run from that, but I am a person who likes making people uncomfortable because I'm uncomfortable. And so not that I want to hurt anybody, but I just want everyone to think. I don't want anyone to get hurt, but I want everyone to think. And because I'm thinking way too hard about these things. And so I don't really see myself as sort of like this role model, which I think like for Native communities, they're like, oh my gosh, there's a Native woman doing stuff, and let's like put her up on this pedestal, and we're gonna like, you know, really, and it's great, it's nice to be adored. But then I say something really problematic and they're like, oh, whoa, we didn't mean, sorry everyone, she's a little problematic. But because but that's the beauty of it, is that I think comedians, we're honest and raw in a way that gets most people fired. Yeah. And so, but it's something that I feel like I cannot help, and therefore I need to do in a healthy way. So with that, I will tell you that I am so excited to be a part of a project called You're Welcome America, which celebrates or disappoints, depending on who you are, Black and Native voices, and specifically my voice and Joyelle Nicole Johnson, who's amazing. And we got together and we wrote along with a lot of really amazing writers, some who are here, and we really kind of like, for me, I feel like the stakes, I've never gone into my career with fear, like, oh, I shouldn't say this because it's going to get me canceled. I've been canceled, like not on the internet, but like in society. I have gone places where they're like, oh, Native Americans exist. We thought you were dead. Yeah, we thought you went extinct. We're surprised that you survived, to my face. And I was like, ouch. Yeah, we did. We survived the genocide, guys. Sorry to update you. And so that's why I felt like, well, I don't really have a fear of like, what am I going to say that's going to hurt people and get me canceled? Because there's not a space for me in this society and media anyway. So with that, I do think it's really important to be mindful though. And that's where I feel like I like to take in all the knowledge I can from people who are on the grounds, grassroots, social justice organizations, because I'm also a very humble person, as most Native people are. We're extremely majestic and humble and spiritual. And that's not true. But I would like to know what I'm doing and the impact that I'm going to have. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to come together with social justice organizations, and I just don't think that I could find it anywhere else. And so I'm just super blessed and happy. And oh yeah, You're Welcome America just dropped another episode today on YouTube, so you can check that out if you want.
So, and just to add on to that one, I just had a big realization. Aristotle dead, Norman Lear alive, Native Americans very much alive. So thanks for that truth bomb, Adrian. So to just clarify and piggyback on that, what we did in the think tank that we had in Tulsa, Arizona, or Tulsa, Oklahoma, oh my gosh, was, oh boy, I have not slept in days.
We're not like wait, I was about to say geometry, but that's not right. Geology, also not right. Geography.
Geography is not.
We are not those people.
No.
All
by the way, I am a Leo. Oh no, I'm a Libra. I don't even know. I'm a Libra, but Libras don't care about their signs. That's what I've learned.
That's weird.
So that's weird. We're just in the middle always. I'm always in the middle. We had this think tank in Tulsa with Native folks and other marginalized folks, but primarily Natives. Out of that think tank came the idea to make a series called You're Welcome, America. From there, we actually then we got the grants that allowed us to make the series and start another writer's room that was exclusively, with myself being the only exception, Black and Native women, because it is very much from a female perspective. So we found the appropriate comedians to come in, join that writer's room and work from that space. So what you see, if you search for Your Welcome, America, was written by people with the lived experience of being Black and Native women. And yet it's all through the unique experience of Adrian and Joyelle, because not all Black and Native people are the same. So it's very much from their perspective in life, but comedy written, structured for them. Just to clarify that a little bit.
Thank you. You're really good at stuff like that. I tend to ramble, which is why I'm a comedian. When I'm stand up, I just
Your rambles were like very good history lessons and funny at the same time. So.
Also, you had one of the greatest lines of all time that I just heard you do, Adrian. I've heard you do a lot of comedy, but the line about, I don't need to be worried about cancel media because I've already been canceled in the world. I don't know if that's something you're already using, but I
should make a t-shirt.
We should workshop it right now.
I mean, you should be a comedian. It's very funny.
Is there anything else we want to say before we jump into, I see that there's some questions coming in.
One thing that I might add, just for thinking that there's probably there's a lot of social change people in the upswell community, right? And independent sector is a lot of the sector that I'm talking about, which I would call writ large civil society, right? Philanthropy, social justice, advocacy groups, activists, et cetera. And one thing that I just want to make sure that we punctuate here, because obviously we're having fun together, but I want to punctuate something really serious, which is part of the genesis of all of this. Not only was the research, but also we could look at examples of comedy being not used well, right? So, and what I mean by that is, on the social change side of things, right? And I'll put myself in that too. We're like real earnest and we're smart and we're well-meaning and we are very in control of our messages, right? We message test them, we develop them strategically, we sit in conference rooms and decide all that stuff. And so when it comes to letting go of that a little bit for the creative process that comes with comedy, we might not be naturally positioned to do that well because it's not what we're kind of trained to do, right? We're trained to think like target audience message here, we're going to reach them. And that's all fine. I get it. I teach this stuff. But to say that part of the reason that we thought this creative modeling was so important was because we would see an example where, let's just say, insert lovely advocacy group A, and they would say, well, let me get one comedy writer to kind of like make my 10-point message structure less boring. And that's not comedy. It's just like maybe mildly less boring messages, but it's not making real art out of the thing. And so we felt like it was important to actually model the true creative process of comedy, which needs to get messy and weird and yes, a little bit offensive before it sort of comes out, because we wanted to inspire, do-gooders to work with comedians, but we don't want to inspire the social justice sector to work with comedians badly. Meaning not getting the best of what makes comedy people so special, which is that they see the world differently. So if you kind of force them to see the world a little bit like you, only slightly funnier, it doesn't result in anything really great. And back to the research on comedy as persuasion, comedy as persuasion works, not only through our cognitive minds, but through what we would call our heuristic processing brains, which means it's through affection and liking the speaker and being really, really amused. So that's something that's really important, I think, for those of you all who might be thinking, oh, great, we're going to work with comedy, and you should. But remember that when you try to do that, don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid of what they might do to your material, because they're really smart and they might do something. And usually in our experience, they find a truth or a nugget or a way to see it that truly cuts through the clutter and is a kind of common sense that, frankly, is really the way that culture moves forward anyway, right? So we really need to be thinking about that really consciously.
Yeah, Katie, I just want to add. Oh, go ahead, Canis.
As someone who's been hired to do a lot of that sort of punch up, I will say it feels like someone adding eggs at the end of a cake recipe. It's just an inedible mess. It's just like you baked something and then you just cracked a raw egg on top of it and expect it to be a cake, but that's not how it works. Sorry, Bethany.
Love that analogy. No, I love that analogy. I think our goal with the think tanks is to unleash the comedians and allow the social justice organizations for a moment to sit in their own discomfort with not having control, and then realizing like as comedians, we are professionals, we're experts at what we do, just as people on the other side are experts at what they do. So we don't need to be micromanaged, and yet we still schedule some check-ins to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. But as far as weighing in on the humor as it's being evolved is not particularly helpful, and I think it requires a lot of trust. So something I love about it, that we don't go in with expectations, because we feel like we're pulling together genius brains for a reason, so we might as well let them just do their own thing and deal with the end result after that, which has literally every time been bigger and better than I could have thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing, I think that we're probably about to start the Q&A, and there are already some questions in there, but I just see in what we're seeing, there's one big question I think that we do want to kind of take on, and I really want all of us to reflect on it. And I'll just start since I'm already talking, but this question about what's off limits on comedy, this is such an endless question, and I'm a little bored by it. I'll be honest, because once we do the we're scared of comedy convo, we're not doing the what's possible with comedy conversation, which is the one that we're trying to have. And it really comes up every single time I personally give a talk about comedy and social justice. The first question is, when does it go too far? I understand societally we need to have that conversation. We're all in a debate right now about Dave Chappelle and, inciting violence in his, all of that is true. I'm not suggesting it's not an important question, but what I am suggesting is when we only focus on that, when we get the opportunity to talk about comedy and social justice, it still says that we're afraid of it. And I think we have to get past this question, because comedians can talk about this all day long. And the one thing that I'll just say is that comedy people, again, there is a special, I just wrote this in a new book that's coming out next year. I wanted to write something deep and theoretical about why comedy brains are so special. And it truly is, there's a whole bunch of work in psychology about creativity and what makes a creative person. And you have to be, oh God, I always forget the word, but I've called it creative deviance. It simply means that some creative brains, i.e. comedians, literally the definition of the work is find reality and bend it and find a new way to see it enough that we recognize it can laugh. But we need to trust that somebody seeing a really old social problem in a different way and communicating it differently, we need to trust that that's probably a good idea to sometimes see what that does, right? And so if we spend a lot of time being afraid of comedians, we're not going to see what's really possible when we really let comedians see something the way they're going to see it and maybe communicate it back. Now, to be clear, and then I truly am going to pass it to the comedians to ask this, when do things go too far? What's off limits? That's sort of the question. To be clear, none of us are advocating punching down, and things that are hurtful, and comedy for decades has used lots of damaging tropes. So I'm not suggesting that we're idiots and we don't know that. But I just want to suggest that I think that we need to come up with higher level questions about comedy and social change if we're going to sort of progress these ideas forward. But that said,
I just came up with an analogy and I want to test it, and then we will move on to questions. But it's like if you hired, which people in the social justice world and grant making world are more familiar with, if you hire an artist to paint something, right? You don't give them like the paint by numbers. You know?
It's really good. Here's a tree.
Yeah, paint a tree. We've sketched it for you. You say like you are an artist and we trust your vision and your brain. And I feel like the sooner and the more we continue to treat comedians that way as instruments and artists, the quicker we can really make huge social impact. Okay, questions before we ramble.
But you know what? I want to, before we do that, but for Adrian and Canis, I'd love for you all, as people who are like literally on the road. I mean, Canis is truly on the road right now to a show. How exciting is that? And Adrian's on the road literally all the time doing shows. If you follow her on Instagram, you'd be like, holy crap, where is she now? But like, you're literally making comedy every day. And so you're negotiating this real question about what's off limits, how do you think of that question?
Okay, so the limit thing, I'm going to agree with Katie, is a question that we get truly all of the time. One thing that I like about the comedy.
Should we have Adrian answer first, because Canis, we can't hear you right now.
Yeah, good idea. Canis, we can't, you sound crazy, you sound not good.
You're the dying Terminator right now.
Is that we work with comedians.
Adrian,
not Upswell's fault.
Invested in that particular issue and say, what are your...
Sorry, Upswell.
Adrian, why don't you go?
So we'll circle back. So
thoughts on elder care?
Okay, yes, we get this question a lot. What is taboo? What is, what will I not talk about? There's nothing that I won't talk about, because I think it's important as a society that we have conversations. Yeah, so I feel like as if I put myself in a box and say, oh, here's a little box that I just won't touch, I don't see that, and it tends to be the things that are the most vulnerable. Like a genocide is a good example. A lot of people are like, you can't do a genocide joke. And yeah, there's nothing funny about genocide. And it's like, well, okay, I am a product of boarding school. I've lived my life under the Department of Interior and the BIA, and I have seen genocide and its effect on my family firsthand. You can't tell me that I can't write a joke about it, because it's been my life and experience. And so, does that mean that I am not conscious of the effect of that joke and how it can hurt people? No, that I am very aware of that. And so comedians have to play a very just careful dance. And of course, you do see bad comedy, you do see it. So we are human. And so we're going to get really bad comedians in there. So yes, I agree with what everyone said. I also don't believe in punching down. So I'm a punch up type person, but yeah.
Canis,
and Canis just said what she was saying is that she thinks the fact that we hire people invested in the issues means that they approach the topic from a place of empathy.
Well said, Canis.
Yeah, and I think that's what, I think that makes a lot of sense. Should we get on to some questions?
Yeah, let's do it. And again, apologies to everyone on the internet. This is not Upswell's fault. Canis is on the road to an actual comedy show, which is very exciting.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is like comedians are able to adapt and make things work, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
I agree.
So, yeah,
Adrian. I agree.
What's
Hit
the
us
best
with
way
some
to tackle these questions? Upswell, are you going to tell us, or should we just go through the chat? Okay.
So
These are just
going up.
comments.
There is
I
a Libra
see.
who cares about her sign.
Oh, that's
Yes.
important.
That's important.
A major takeaway from the comedy segment was what is off limits. That would be good.
Oh, okay. Well, we can also improvise. We can share questions that we get a lot.
Oh, Lawrence has shared everything coming through the Q&A. There's a Q&A.
I do want to say something. There's a comment in the chat about the misinformation about Native people mostly living on reservations. And that is true, that most Native Americans do not live on a reservation. Most Native American people live in cities, so they are literally all around you. And that is how powerful erasure is that you could have a Native neighbor, and it doesn't mean necessarily that they don't know their culture, they're disconnected or any of that. A lot of native urban natives are extremely close to their culture too. So it's just another misconception that we're trying to tackle.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. I was thinking too about that question about what's off limits. And I always think about what Jenna Friedman said about it, which is that basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think this is correct, that nothing is off limits, like Adrian was saying, but sometimes comedians are tone deaf.
That's a good
so we can talk about heavy subjects like we might, CMSI might be jumping into a think tank about abortion, which seems like what could possibly be funny about abortion. But as long as we are talking about it in a way that's not tone deaf, we can probably make some really persuasive, hilarious comment about something that a lot of women and men carry with them in a really sad place. Same with the think tanks we've done about being stereotyped for your race. When we get to really explore what that is and find the absurdity within it, I think it's actually therapeutic for the comedians who are going through it. Adrian, I'm thinking of the IllumiNative think tank where we were making fun of one of our comedians, Sebastian Canelli, who's just a white dude from Long Island. And we were,
Staten Island.
Staten Island. Oh, geography.
Very
is not
specific.
yeah. Staten Island. And we started talking about how his type is like. What was the line, Katie?
Oh, I think, did Bobby say Bobby or Ryan said, I think we need to see more Staten Island representation on American comedy. It's such a funny script, but we're like, yes, where is Staten Island? Yeah.
There's another question in here about what are our favorite examples or specials, comedy specials that lift up this year, like that are uplifting and that are politically progressive. Do you guys have any favorites?
Oh my God, I have some, and I'll talk about them really quickly. They're not stand-up specials, even though I feel like that question might be saying stand-up specials, but let me just talk about comedy that I think has been really meaningful over the last couple of years. Schitt's Creek. Just cannot say enough about it. And I want to tie it back to that geeky term that I just taught you all, or you already know, civic imagination. I love this decision. Dan Levy, the showrunner, made, and he did lots of press interviews where he talked about this. He's showing life in a rural small town, and he is in a loving gay relationship on the show. He's the showrunner, and I will not tell you what happens to this couple at the end because that would be a spoiler. But yeah, that was terrible. But he said, I chose not to show homophobia because we see it all the time, and we see it in television, and I want to show what it looks like when it's not there. And he said the letters that he got from so many parents of young queer people and queer people themselves saying, oh my God, to actually see what the world would look like when we don't have to endlessly do our coming out story. I just think it was a bold, creative decision. Another one that I'm loving, and I know some people have complicated feelings about it, so I'll just stand by my own love of it, maybe because this is what I needed psychologically over the last year, but Ted Lasso, I think Ted Lasso is showing what, there's so many examples of toxic masculinity in our culture and in comedy, and to show this sort of like adorably kind-hearted, dorky joke-telling guy sort of, kind of spread this and seek help. Oh, spoiler, seek help for mental illness, I think is going to be really meaningful for a lot of people and a lot of families. And then the final one that I won't even talk about because I might talk, I'm sure maybe others want to talk about it. The show Reservation Dogs, Native Comedy, is inspiring young people on reservations to create podcasts to talk about the show. That makes my head explode with wonder. I just can't believe how the show has been on for 2 months, and it's inspiring young Native people who've literally never seen themselves portrayed at all. Adrian, you will know more than me, but certainly not in a comedy, to actually have young people creating their own creative media in response to it. It's all over YouTube. I just think that is awesome.
I love it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just piggyback off that. Like, and the group that kind of found, I don't know what the word is, that where Reservation Dogs came from, 1491s, the group, they have had a good impact on Indian country, what we call Indian country, because when I first saw them doing their sketch comedy, I found, wow, like I'm not the only person that tackles politics and comedy at the same time. And so they're a good example. And yeah, I agree with Schitt's Creek. If you guys haven't seen that, you definitely need to see it. Passing the mic.
What I think, Katie, all of the examples I think that you're talking about is something that we do a lot in our think tanks, right? Where there's a way to make really satirical and biting comedy, and we welcome that. We welcome the anger and the lived experience and reflecting that. But we also really celebrate what Katie talks about is the civic imagination, right? The portraying hope and optimism in a world that feels really clunky and is hurting right now. Actually, I feel like that kind of humor is sometimes harder to write and more effective at modeling the change that we want to see and telling the world, and people think of comedians as cynics, but like, I think sometimes comedians can tell the world that there is a better reality, and this is what it looks like, and this is how we get there. And making optimism funny takes a lot of skill, but is very, very meaningful. And I think it's harder to do. Like, we all have an uncle that can say the mean, funny thing.
We all have the uncle. You know what? I want to address. Oh, I'm sorry, Adrian, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I saw a question in there that I was gonna, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I wanted to pick up on this one because I get this one a lot too. So I want to address this one about Ruhi asks, is there a disconnect between complacency and comedy? News shows like The Daily Show, where you can find in the absurdity and reality and find other like-minded people to laugh with. This is therapeutic, but does it take away from individuals taking action toward change? Important question, and it's really important that we never conflate different forms of comedy. Satirical news is doing something very specific. It is not necessarily all the stuff that we're talking about here. Satirical news does a lot of different things, and oftentimes what it does is talk to like-minded people. So you're exactly right about that. But I think it's important for us to not conflate political pointed satire, satirical news, as a surrogate for all comedy. Now, Schitt's Creek has nothing to do with The Daily Show, right? Schitt's Creek painted the portrait of a world that felt kind and came together. Ted Lasso in many elements does the same thing. Reservation Dogs is just fucking amazing, excuse my language, and inspiring real quick. So not to be obnoxious about the book, but the book that I wrote that hopefully someone put in the chat, Comedian Activists Walk into a Bar, takes the trouble to go through every genre of comedy and talk about how it functions slightly differently when it comes to how audiences respond to it. And then the other thing that I want to add here is that, so here, geeky fact coming at you. When we think about how public policy happens in this country, it is a fact. Political scientists found this out years ago. This is not my study, but study from years ago. Public opinion precedes public policy 3/4 of the time. So what we think and feel culturally matters in the decisions that we make about how to treat people in our most official governing legislative ways, right? So I think it's really important that we don't look at comedy or any genre of art, frankly, to be a magic bullet. By the way, those social science and media has disproved this idea a long time ago. We're never watching one thing and going to do exactly the thing. Sometimes we do, if it's a political ad or whatever, but that can't be why we celebrate culture in social change work. When we see each other represented in ways that are positive and humanizing and uplifting over time, that really matters in public policy and other corporate decision-making, corporate and legislative decision-making that we make in this country. No change in history has happened without public opinion. Let me just back that up, because no self-respecting professor person would say such a black and white thing. Let me back that up. I'm sure someone could find an exception, but the broader point is the idea that public opinion writ large, i.e., what we think and feel about other people, absolutely matters in the rules that we make that either demonize some groups and dehumanize them, or choose to treat others equitably, right? And so culture contributes to that in a massive way, and comedy has a really special way. So we can't look at it to have this sort of high bar of like, did it make me go exactly change my behavior? Well, culture doesn't work exactly that way, right? Culture happens over time and, many different constellation of stories. But I think one of the sub-themes of today is when we erase entire groups and entire lived experiences, we don't even have a chance to think about entire swaths of the population as worthy of equity and justice. So let me get off my soapbox. I obviously have a strong feeling about that.
That was beautifully said, Katie. And I think we have like 2 minutes left. So this was a real pleasure. And thank you all for taking the time to spend with us. Adrienne and Canis, thank you for jumping on. Katie, it's your job. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It's awesome. And real quickly, there's how do we ensure that as comedians that we have that people are following our call to action? For me, that's not the point. I just want to be human. I just want people to see me as a human being, and I just want to be humanized. And sometimes being humanized I'm good with that. I just want to be human. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Status note to end on. Thank you.
Love you.